March 2023 is a very special month for us at The Guiding Voice, as we dedicate the whole month to feature inspiring women leaders across the globe. And I would like to take a moment to thank Deepika Trehan, the founder of Corporate Diva, for connecting us with all these wonderful women. In a career spanning 17 years, Kaushi has worked for two major global brands, America Online, AOL, and General Motors, GM. While at AOL, she found her grounding, and at GM, she began her transformational journey. She has spent 12 wholesome years with GM as the in-house communications leader with a strategic focus on internal communications and employer branding. Leadership positioning was also a significant part of the portfolio profile, articles, opinion pieces, social media posts, strengthening the role of leaders, showcasing the culture of the organization is where she has had the most impact. In this episode, let us chat with Kaushi Biddappa on building personal brand through well-being and authenticity. This is the Guiding Voice podcast series, the Guiding Voice for a better future. Friends, I'm your host Naveen Samala, just a fellow IT professional on a mission to make the world a better place to live. Through the Guiding Voice, we drive conversations that matter and conversations that add value to your life and to your career. Thank you so much for joining me. Kaushi, hearty welcome to the Guiding Voice. Thanks for being part of our journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naveen. And thank you for making space for these meaningful conversations and the whole essence of, how one person can make a change. And instead of wishing for that change to happen outside, how do you drive that within you? So I'm really, really grateful. And I'm grateful to the folks who believe in what I do, endorsing me. And I often say this to Deepika, you've been a wonderful sponsor. And I'm sure we will have those little conversations around it as well. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure to have you there, Kaushi. And in fact, I have heard a lot about you, not only through Deepika. In fact, I've been following you on LinkedIn for the last few years. In fact, our conversation was supposed to happen last year, but anyways, good things take time, right? So I'm glad we are here.
I think it's the divine timing. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So without further ado, let's get into our conversation, Kaushi. Can you share the key milestones in your career journey just to let our audience know that career is not a linear path? And as I was referring to before, right? People change domains, people change roles, and at times people take up one or two levels below, right? Likewise, is there anything happened in your case as well? And what has been your journey?
Yeah. So I find this question very meaningful because it gets me to reflect. In fact, that's what this journey is all about, right? So from that standpoint, if I had to highlight the milestones in my career journey in space, I think I would easily be able to articulate them as three. One is about from an intern moving into being a full-fledged employee. The other one is leadership without titles. And the other element of leadership without titles is about how do you influence without authority. And the third essence is to move into a space where senior leadership is thrilled to be associated with you. You see, I didn't stick to any titles here, but it's really about the processes involved. So when I joined the workforce, the whole thing was about, I'm happy being an intern because it means so much more stress and responsibilities because, you come with an essence of living life very differently. The values that you hold evolve over time. So that's also something that I want to share, right? At the core, your values will remain the same. But with time, your priorities change. So for me, the first shift was understanding that moving from an intern to a full-fledged employee meant responsibilities. And how do you shoulder responsibilities effectively and with ease? So that was the first milestone. And the other thing, as you move along the journey, you're sitting and thinking like, in the university, you have a professor or a lecturer, or in a school environment, you have a teacher. You always have someone guiding you. So, Naveen, to a large extent, when I was part of the workforce in my initial years of my career, I'm thinking now my boss will come and tell me, this is how this needs to be done. This is how you do your promotion piece, etc., etc. And I realized that's not how this works. You have to be in the driver's seat. You have to be an active participant. You can't be a passive participant in your career journey. And while I say that, I also want to indicate that there will be moments when you become the observer, the spectator, to understand what's going wrong. But most often, you have to be in the driver's seat driving your career decisions, because guess what? Only you know yourself the best. The others can guide you. So, how do you start understanding the importance of leadership without titles? Is can you operate without a title and can you show up for yourself? So, that's a big part of it. And also, when you join an organization, it's not like you become a people leader and you have teams under you. You will be working on projects and you have to steer the team together, but you're not in a position of power or authority. Why should I listen to you? How do you influence them positively becomes a big part of a leadership skill. Now, the third element that I highly, highly speak about is the fact that you can be all that you want to be, but will others want to be associated with you? That is a big indicator of how successful you are as a leader. And that doesn't mean you're forming followers, but do you have a community that's willing to drive towards a common goal? So, from being an intern to a full fledged employee, and then understanding how do you shoulder responsibilities by being in the driver's seat and not being a passive participant in your career, to being in a space where senior leadership is very excited to be associated with you, is something that really, really helped me understand how it is always about being intentional in the choices you make.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what it is.
So,
about.
one thing that stuck to me is be the driver. Because many a times young professionals assume that my boss or my super boss knows more about me and they will carve path for me. But you made a very important point here. And on that note, let's switch to my next question. So, Kaushi, can you share the top three things that have attributed to your success so far? Like both in terms of 12 years of your corporate career and then the later part, which is into consulting space and all. So, what are three attributes?
So, when I sit back and look at how these things transform, it really comes down to the essence of be so good at what you do that your talent cannot be dismissed. It's like you can't negotiate on that space. And then while you're so good at it, how do you continuously reinvent yourself? Because it's about being relevant. While you are a master, also be ready to be a student. And that's very, very important. Being relevant in the space is very, very important, because what happens with a lot of us is we start to get complacent. And that's when we realize we're not living to our greatest potential. So the essence is really about be so good at what you do that your talent cannot be dismissed. And another important piece I have noticed is how do you leave people feeling about your engagement? And Maya Angelou says this, right? People will always remember you for how you made them feel. And a trait that I studied was how enthusiastic are you? And you watch yourself. You will want to be in the company of people who are enthusiastic. And it's not like you don't care about the people who are sad or depressed. It's not like you don't care about it. But when you're around such people, you are motivated, you're feeling inspired about your goals and visions. So try and understand where are you on the energy levels? When people engage with you, are they going back feeling driven and they want to make a change? Or they're like, oh my God, like, why did I even go to this person? Like, did I have to do that? So you see, so you can be very good at your work. You could be competent, but where are you on the energy set? So I remember reading, there's a social perception model which indicates people unconsciously assess you for these two parameters, which is competency and warmth. Okay. Now, if you know people are assessing you for your warmth and your competency, what are you going to do about it? How do you want to drive that for yourself? Which is why a lot of times people are competent, they're very good at their work, but they're unable to figure out why am I not moving forward in my career? Maybe that energy set you need to check on. Or maybe you're very good on the energy set, but you've not built the skill set. Now, I remember, a few years ago, the conversation was like, this HR person is a beautiful human being, great, great human being, but not a very good leader. And that kind of stayed with me as a reference point, saying, Kaushi, you can be a brilliant human being, but you also have to be good at what you do. You need to excel. You can't be mediocre in that space. That was an instant reminder, and it would keep coming back to me every time I would slip into my complacency space. So be so good at what you do that your talent cannot be dismissed. Then it's not just competency, it's also warmth. Now, the other element, which is the third element for me, is sponsors. You could be good at what you do, people love having that experience with you, but will they recommend your name for an opportunity? And what is very important to register, Naveen, you're not going to be in the room of decision makers all the time. There will be events where you will speak up and stand up for yourself, but there are so many events where you're not good. Like, look, for instance, this morning when you shared, I was referred by a certain person, right? That's a sponsor. Will that person speak for you? So build that network for yourself. And that network can only happen when you've shared your aspirations with people. People sometimes think, I don't want to talk about it, I will jinx it. I get that. I totally get that. But find a balance where you're also talking about your aspirations with people, because you need that network. So, yeah. So, those are the elements that contribute to career success.
That's so amazing set of thoughts. First and foremost is be good at what you do. And then the energy levels that you bring to the table, make sure that those energy levels are kind of contagious. And third most important aspect is the sponsors, like who will recommend you for an opportunity. So very well put through, Kaushi. Now let's move ahead. Kaushi, your LinkedIn banner says the word author comes from the same root as the word authentic. So to be authentic is to be the author of our own lives, right? So can you explain that to our audience as well?
Yeah. So I think a lot of this stems from the fact that in our journey, and I'm speaking for myself here when I say this, there was a time I felt I didn't even realize I was playing the victim. For me, it was more about, this person did this to me and that person did this. How could they behave like this with me? I'm so kind. I'm so generous. I'm so thoughtful. Why are people behaving? Why do people? It was always about things outside of myself. And guess what I was doing? I was giving away control. And and here I'm not speaking in the negative terms of giving away control, but in terms of I don't believe in myself enough. I've never really sat down to know myself enough, right? So if I'm going to be a victim all my life, and if I'm going to have the victim mindset, and that's how I'm going to write my story, can you imagine how limiting that story is going to be? And that is when I realized the importance of how you are the author of your story. And that will always come from a space of knowing thyself. And that knowing thyself will happen when you're willing to sit through the discomfort. Because what happens in our journey is we are taught to be happy always, which means you have to choose to be positive always. Now, when I say, if you notice, when I spoke about the energy set, right, where I spoke about warmth, that doesn't mean you're not dealing with challenges. You're dealing with challenges, but how honest are you about dealing with challenges? And I remember some time ago, people would often dismiss, saying, this person is so emotional. I would receive feedback saying, it's nice, but don't be so emotional, don't be so sensitive. And I understood what they were saying, but I don't think I realized it, because I feel when you realize it, you operate very differently. So I learned I am highly sensitive, which means I'm intuitive, which means I'm creative. But if I'm not aware, I could fall into the retar of absorbing people's energies, and I will start living their life. I had to understand this. It took me a while to understand this. So, which is why today, when I say the author, you are the author of your story, is primarily because we know ourselves better, but are we patient? Are we self-compassionate to sit down and know yourselves? So today, honestly, Naveen, every time when I write from that space, I think I've used writing as a medium of expression today. That's my medium of expression. And even conversations, it's a great medium of expression, right? Stories, great medium. And honestly, for me, it's like before getting to bed, it's like, what does guidance want me to talk about? Okay. When I started my journey on LinkedIn, it was about, how do you build your brand and all the processes, the steps. Very strategic, very mindfully done, very thoughtfully done. It was heartfelt and human. And I guess that's when you have a community happening, right?
Yeah.
But as I moved along the journey, it came down to, will I write a post because people say you have to consistently write it? Or will I ask guidance, what is it you want me to talk about? And I will write from that space. I felt, so today in my journey, I find purpose in sitting down with guidance and saying, what is that you want me to refer? Or what is that you want me to highlight? Or if I'm unsure about it, I will take some time, but it will come to me. Is that belief? It's working with higher self, to put it that way, because I think most of the time our conflict is between ego and the higher self. The ego will keep you in your familiar zone, in your comfortable zone, will keep you protected. It likes the known. It loves the known because then you're under control. But when you start working with your higher self, it's about surrender. It takes a while. Again, I always tell this, right? It came as an understanding and a realization much later. Understanding is more of, okay, I want to understand this, and it's about the concept part. Now when you start applying it, that's when the wisdom happens, right? And then you reach a phase where you realize it, where you don't feel the need to explain it to anybody else. You're living it. I guess that's what this is about, because a simple thing is, a lot of us understand we are the soul, not the body. Understand. But there's a journey to get to realization. And I think that's the journey we are all on, and we don't realize it. So, yeah.
And by
So,
the time
coming
we
back-
realize, probably, sorry to interrupt. By the time
No,
we
no, no.
realize,
So-
probably half of our life is over.
Yeah. And see, again, I would say this very beautiful analogy that I found meaning is, sometimes I feel they have this question that, Kashi, how did you turn spiritual suddenly, or how did it happen? And I've struggled with that, right? And I realized this, it came as guidance again. Suppose you want to travel to Coorg, okay? And I'm biased because I'm a Kodava, so I'll use Coorg as an example. And you live in Bangalore, you started your journey, and you're a little tired, and you choose Mysore as a pit stop, you rest.
Yeah.
When you wake up the next day, do you start your journey from Bangalore or you start your journey from Mysore? So what I understood about our spiritual journeys are, we've all been on this path in our lifetimes, okay, in different lifetimes. And then suddenly you're woken up from that sleep, and then you start your journey. So some people have worked on themselves in other lifetimes, and they are a little ahead, which is why you notice some people are much older, but I see they live very unfulfilled lives where they're always looking for things outside of themselves. And then there are youngsters. And Naveen, honestly, I've met 20-year-olds, 23-year-olds, 24. In fact, in all honesty, it was when I started my journey on LinkedIn, my guidance as a coach was Ashish Singhal. She's in Jaipur, and she's based in Jaipur. She runs her coaching space, coaching business from there. And we connected on LinkedIn, and she's 23, 23, 24. And the wisdom she carried, I was blown. And then my interactions with other people made me realize, age, I think sometimes age is a very superficial thing to adhere to. It's experiences, and that kind of teaches me the importance of engaging with different sections of people and community. And it again goes back to being the authentic you, which is, are you willing to bring your whole self? Are you willing to stay aligned versus comply? Because a lot of our journey is, I need to fit in, because we all want to belong, and Brené Brown says this very beautifully. if you don't belong to yourself, and if you don't know how to do that, you can never belong anywhere else. And I guess that's what authenticity is. And a little might be a little off the grid, but here's something that I think is very meaningful as a share is, as a young girl, I have watched Princess Diana and I've loved her always. Like, I've admired her as a woman, okay, as a leader, etc., etc. And I think even the compassion side of things as a young girl. And then you go, and as an adult, I watched a series, very recently I watched some of the series, and you realize one thing: you could be the most beautiful, most successful, most compassionate person. But if your self worth is still going to be measured by someone outside of you, it's going to be a downward spiral. So then I'm thinking, I have tremendous regard for her. I love that woman. She's not there, but I still thought it was important to learn from experiences, right? And then very recently, I remember tuning into Michelle Obama's one of those video messages, and she said that it's a book. I remember reading her book, Becoming. There's another book she's launched, and she spoke about how she would continue to seek validation from a partner, which is Obama. And she said, if you're not happy with yourself, no matter how many times your husband has given you a compliment, it's never going to register. And she gave examples of how he would say such great things about me. But since I didn't believe in myself, I felt he was not complimenting me enough. And I'm sitting and thinking, Naveen, this is Michelle Obama. Okay. Clearly someone who knows herself and highly self-aware, right? If she is dealing with this challenge, can you imagine the others?
Yeah.
And it was like a yardstick of measure, right, for me. And I realized that again brings me back to the essence of how important it is to know thyself. And that can only happen when you're reflecting, meditating on small events in life, right? People think it has to be a grand purpose. No. So yeah, that's knowing thyself. And when you know yourself, you're able to put yourself to better use. And you are the author. You're the author of that story. And that's where the essence is for me.
Super powerful examples. And I can relate to one aspect when you mentioned about Arshi Singhal, if I pronounce the name correctly. There is one lady whom I interviewed last year, Vanshika Chenderia. Again, she's about 23-year-old. But the kind of wisdom that she has acquired now, it's immeasurable. Like, I think probably I would have acquired that much of knowledge in my mid 30s, right? So that's how the generation is. And as you rightly said, age is superficial. Great conversation so far. So you have tuned into the Guiding Voice podcast series, and we are in a conversation with Kaushi Biddappa on building your personal branding through well-being and authenticity. So Kaushi, let us continue our conversation, and I would like to hear from you about personal branding, because everybody has their own definition, and I'm really keen on hearing your perspective about personal branding.
Yeah. You know what? I love the statement which says everyone has their own definition of personal branding. And what really helped me on this journey was, over the course of years, I started to recognize the importance of personal branding from a standpoint of intentional living. Because at the end of the day, it is not a projection, a superficial projection, but it's more about inside out congruency. And how do people perceive you and who are you? It's about ensuring you reduce the gap. I want to repeat that, right? How do people perceive you and who are you? The true essence of you. And if there is a stark difference in how people perceive you and who you are, how do you want to reduce the gap? For instance, if you believe you are creative and you are creative, but people don't see you as creative, will you make a shift in how people see you in that light? Is a question you would ask yourself, right? That's being intentional. If you want to be a public speaker, what are some of the essential elements of a public speaker? Being confident. Are you able to hold the attention of the audience? Are you able to hold conversations with ease without boring the audience? This is something that people always seek, right? Now, if that's the case, how are you perceived? Are you perceived as like, oh my God, person A comes on stage and you know what? Very knowledgeable, but what examples? Very dry topics, so non relatable, so old school. You see, there's a journey to be traveled. So that is where, for me, it really comes down to personal branding is intentional living, which means there's a great room for how to improve and make changes in the journey that you are in. And it's going to be a constant thing because we are always evolving. There is change, there's transition. How do you go through that process? And if I were to kind of bring it down to a closer home reference point, I mean, this morning, I discussed some of these questions with my son, and I actually asked him, if you had personal brands in mind, would you give me some examples? And it's my assumption that he's seen me work, he's seen me on calls. So it's my assumption that he understands. But I also sensed that it was not clear, but I kept quiet. And he said, Mama, but tell me, what does that mean? And I learned one thing. If you cannot simplify the question or you can't simplify your response, which means you've not understood yourself. So this was my test now. So I said, Shivang, someone with a personal brand and a strong one is someone who's created an impact, who makes a difference, and also about their positive influences in the community around. And when I answered that question, I got my definition for personal brand. So someone who makes an impact, makes a difference in the lives of others. And when I say makes a difference in the lives of others, you'll realize you will have a community following you when you're addressing their pain points. If you go back and look at people's profiles, and I'm very active on LinkedIn, hence the example of LinkedIn, the ones that have a huge community and engagement are always speaking from the space of how do I guide, how do I enable them. So that's something that I would always go back and reinforce, that if you want a community following you, not in the sense of you feeling a leader, but in terms of how can you serve the audience. And that's the essence of building your personal brand.
Wow. So it all ties to the authenticity. And one thing that is so impactful is this statement which covered, how do people perceive you versus who are you, right? So if we are authentic, then we will understand the gap and try to build that thing.
Yes,
this is
yes,
so
yes.
powerful. This is so
And
powerful.
something that I want to address as authenticity is about, it's closely linked to vulnerability, right? I remember, a lot of times people would say she's emotional, etc., etc. But you know what? We don't realize that this person is choosing to be vulnerable. And by choosing to be vulnerable, this person is making room for you to share your journey and your stories. And I think the ones who've been able to make an impact are the ones who are choosing to be vulnerable, but they've also become very aware as to who do you want to be with? Who's that audience? And it goes back to, how do I want to make a difference? What is my message? I think even, when people reach out to me, leaders, people who want to build their personal brands, even in the coaching sessions, something that I always lay up front is, what is your mission? Or what is your message to the world? What is your message? Because when you started the Guiding Voice podcast, I get a sense your message to the world is like you wanted to bring stories forward and people could draw inferences.
Yeah.
In fact, at the beginning of the sessions, the question was like, what are attributes that lead to career success?
Yeah.
And your intention was everyone has an understanding of what are some of the elements that they are missing, what are some of the elements that they have and they can strengthen and amplify it. What are you trying to do? You're trying to enable an audience here. You're just not trying to just inform, but also bring hope to the audience. So that's where this is.
Absolutely. You nailed it right. The intent is very clear. We wanted to present them the everyday heroes. It need not be Brené Browns or Anthony Robbins or Robin Sharmas of the world, right? We have people around us who have already been there, and we want people to learn from others' experiences. That's the whole intent, and you got it absolutely right.
Just reinforcing what you shared, right? And when people hesitate to show up and they think, I have nothing interesting to share, I'm of no value. Something that is so important to remember is most of us are ordinary people. When I say ordinary people, we live simple lives,
Yeah.
which means we have everyday struggles.
Yeah.
And I always tell, your challenges could be someone's story of hope.
Yeah.
And that's what this is all about, right?
Mm.
And I think going back to restating Brené Brown, your challenges, the way you overcome your challenges could be someone's survival guide. And that can only happen when you are in the thought process of community. Okay. Yeah. And I really like the script stating what the scriptures say about, Sato Guna, which is about community. Rajas is passionate. You're passionate, but it's always about yourself. And tamasic is you're complacent. And I think it's important to have all these elements, because imagine if you're rajasic all the time, you're going to struggle to get good sleep.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with these gunas, right? If you go back to the scriptures, in fact, they're beautiful. But how do you ensure that there's no imbalances? So, and I think when you speak community, you're in your sattvic state. You're really about the oneness of things. And when it's the oneness of things, the purpose becomes bigger. You're not sitting at how will people perceive me, because that message and mission is so much more larger. So yeah, that I think that's something that I really, really wanted to highlight in our conversation this morning.
Absolutely, Kaushi. Now, switching to the leaders, right? Who do you think have established their personal branding so well, and what do you like most in them? You may or may not name them, but essentially, I'm looking at the characteristics, what you like.
Yeah. So I think when I started my journey, I keep going back to being the young girl, because the truth is, I had visions around how do I want to be perceived. And I remember talking to my husband even this morning saying, I think I want people to remember how poised I am, because it's so easy to be in a situation where you're ruffled and rattled and you're losing your calmness, you're being impatient. And it's not because I want people to say, oh my God, she's so calm. No, I think you can get so much done with being calm. People don't understand the strength of stillness and calmness. So, something that I consciously embody as a value is poise. Okay, so that's one thing. And so, from that standpoint, I think I have admired Oprah Winfrey. Okay, so for me, the minute I can close my eyes and say this, the minute I say personal brand, a strong personal brand who's created impact, who's continues to create, make a difference, who's a positive influence in so many lives, is Oprah Winfrey. Because I remember reading one of the articles where she talks about she's in the backyard of her grandmother's house and she's drying her clothes, it's tattered and everything. And she had an intention where she said, this is not how I want to live life. So many of I've seen a lot of us would succumb to pressure of our family situations. This is what it is going to be, and you just adapt to the limitations. But for me, reading that made me realize the power of intention, and how intention need not be. I think for me, it is the example that I would highlight is like when you're driving. I'm not driver material, but I've learned a little bit of the driving piece, right? If you hold on to the steering wheel tight, you're strained, you're restless, and you're actually not moving forward easily. Okay. I just felt that's how you need to set an intention. Be so subtle with it that you set your intention, you play a part, and then you surrender. I think I learned a great deal by watching her over the years. So for me, Oprah Winfrey is a very, very powerful brand. And you go through this process of you've run this show, the Oprah show, for so many years. And you're now like, okay, you want to turn it down. And then there's this little kid who's ailing, I think, writes a letter saying she must continue doing that show. Is powerful. And I felt she's somebody who listens to guidance. And that really, really aligns with me. And one thing that's really stood out for me was when she shared, she was doing this. So it's part of her show is also a reality show. In that show, the husband confided in the show in public that he cheated on his partner. And while the show went on to be very great and everything, Oprah kind of sat down saying, would I just do this for rating? Would I just do this for popularity? And she questioned the intention with why she should be running the show. And she realized she had to do these things. And again, I felt it was about going back and understanding your values. Is this true to who I am? And she chose to have her own network. I'm not sure if it's called, is it own or whatever. It's one of those things that happen very beautifully. She's been on a journey which I think is so gratifying. She's been on a journey where I think it's about when you have an orchard, those fruits are not just for yourself, but it's for the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I think all of that resonates immensely with me.
Yeah.
That's Oprah Winfrey. And the other closer home example down south is Sudhamurthy. I think her value around simplicity is phenomenal. And in my own journey, I realized that it's so easy to add up materialistic objects, for want of a better word. You keep adding it to feel good about yourself, but you're only building attachment. Okay. And we understand when you're entangled in your desires, it causes misery. So when I watch her, I was listening to one of her sharings, and she said that she travels to Kashi, and every time she travels, she takes her vow to give up something that she really, really enjoys. And she loves saris, and she said, I'm not going to be shopping for saris. And I think that comes with great awareness. So for me, Sudhamurthi's simplicity, and that's a strong point for a personal brand. Okay. So for me, Oprah Winfrey is about the purpose. Sudha Murthy also does great work in the space of community, right? But for me, it was the value of simplicity. For me, Oprah, it was about purpose. And very recently, I think I added Prince Harry, to the personal brand chart, is because it's not easy to question the norm. And he says it takes great courage to speak power to truth. Yeah. Or rather say, let me say, it takes great courage to speak truth to power. I think that's the statement he made, and it stayed with me. And he also said about when he started dating Megan, did she fit the mold of a princess? Maybe not, but he completely felt aligned. I saw great insights into how you don't have to necessarily fit in, or rather say, you don't have to fit in to build a brand. You just have to work on being aligned. So for me, being aligned, your value around being simple is very, very important, because then you're able to work passionately without being attached to results. And purpose, what's your big purpose here? So from that standpoint, these are people. And I think if I were to bring it closer home, there is this individual I follow on LinkedIn, and her name is Claire. I'm very vocal about my appreciation for her. She is someone who will call out, for want of a better word, she'll call out the bullshit. She's gonna be bold and speak up. And when she speaks up, you realize she's not just speaking up for herself, but she's speaking up for others. Because what I also noticed is, like, if I were to reference this further, sometimes LinkedIn is misused in terms of people are just wanting to. It's sometimes they think this is a matrimonial site. Some of them do, and very, very. It's just I don't even know. It's just quite inappropriate to even say that. But I just felt this was needed, and I've seen her address this and in varied styles, and I just think that's courage. And guess what? She could just block people and be happy and not talk about it, but she chooses to be very vocal on how do you deal with these. I mean, this is just one of example. She does a lot more on the space of branding and copywriting. But yeah, that's a strong personal brand too for me.
Great set of examples, Kaushi. Now, switching this context to a broader perspective, right? How do we encourage women to not give up?
So I have a play of words here. It's like, actually, I would encourage women to give up, and not in that sense, but I think My sense of giving up would be more in terms of surrender. And I think this, when I say this, it's going to be more gender agnostic. It's like it's for everybody, right? It's about when you know your well being is at stake, it's important to prioritize that, which is why I often say it's about well being. It's your dharma. No one's going to take care of it. At the end of the day, every decision that you make somewhere has a central figure of well being. You have dreams for your kids, you want them to succeed, blah blah blah. It's the subtle indicator is well-being. You want to take care of your aging parents, well-being. You want to grow in your career, well-being. You want a healthy relationship with your partner, well-being. So if well-being is the foundational stone, what are you doing about it when that place is not sacred or you're questioned or conflicted? So that is where I believe surrender is important, because I have like examples here, right? Naomi Osaka, the tennis player. There was there were two views. There are always conflicting views or different thought processes, right? And I respect all of that. And then the most recent one was Jacinta Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. In fact, she said, I no longer have enough in the tank. And in fact, I remember a conversation with my friend Naveen, which said she was sharing like, Kaushi, now people who think women are not strong and we just give up so easily. And while I heard her and I get her essence and I understand her concern, I think it's also important for us to prioritize that, you can't pour from an empty cup. We've been taught to continuously do. So I think in the larger scheme of things, if I were to offer any counsel or piece of advice or insight, I would always say prioritize your well being. Let that be a primary element in your decision maker. So that's surrender. And while I say that, it's very important to have a community that you can go back to. So you're saying you're not alone. Have that comfort. So that's another thing that I would always say. And another very, very essential thing is build your network of sponsors. Be very, very intentional about, see, mentors are good. I love mentors. And it's important to have your network of mentors, but now raise the bar for yourself and have sponsors, people who will speak for you when you're not in the room. So in the broader scheme of things, the guidance that I have for people, when I say people, something that I use as guidance is, Kaushi, where are you on the well-being space? The energy, that's one. Because I feel if you are not enthusiastic about things, you're not going to exude that energy. And like I said, again, people assess you for warmth and it happens very unconsciously. Where are you in that space? So if you think it's time to give up in terms of surrender and maybe someone else will be more effective here, it's okay. It's absolutely okay. It's okay to seek help. People find it very demeaning to seek help. And in fact, if I were to give an example of relationships, I just read in relationships, people wait for 6 years. Apparently, according to statistics from Gottman, the Institute relationship, they wait for 6 years and then they seek therapy. And by then the relationship is already crumbled. So people's essence around seeking help is like, oh my God, it's just not right. It's weakness, it's failure. So all of those narratives that we keep feeding ourselves has to change. So yeah, so that's where the piece of community ecosystem that constantly reminds you you're not alone is important. And sponsors.
Such a powerful set of thoughts. And Kaushi, this has been very interesting and insightful conversation. I'd like to move to the next segment of the conversation. And the next segment is rapid fire questions. And one of the reasons why I ask certain questions in this segment is just to let our audience know that leaders are just another human beings, just like you and me, right? And
Yes.
we want to get to know other side of our speakers. That's the whole intent. And I'm going to kick off a quick rapid fire wherein you can answer them briefly in a word or in a maximum in a phrase. Is that okay?
Yes, I love the intention around these rapid fire questions, because you want to humanize me. So guess what? I can make errors.
Wonderful. Let's get started then. And here comes the first bullet. Have you ever slept in a classroom or a critical meeting or a conference?
I think I've been very wise to step out of the meeting and maybe use the washroom and come back, just freshen up and come back. Yeah. So not slept, but I've yawned a couple of times. Like, yeah. And sometimes you feel like maybe you need a matchstick to keep your eyelids so that you place it near your eyelids to stay open. Yeah. That happens. That happens.
Yeah, fair enough. And what motivates you every day?
I think the fact that, I'm alive, yeah, it makes a big deal because I think the realization, I know you said a phrase, but can I take a little more than a phrase?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
I think when my friend's husband called me up saying, she's very critical and you do not know if she will live too long. Do you want to come and see her? She's in the ICU. At that time, what struck me was it's amazing how we go to bed with the assumption that I will wake up next day, right? Why do we take this for granted?
Indeed. Yeah.
And I think for me, death has been my greatest teacher. And so, from that standpoint, the fact that I'm alive is my motivation.
Wow. All right. So let's go ahead with the next one. Can you describe yourself in just one word?
Creative.
Awesome.
And if I had to ask you this question, if you had one word to describe me, what would that word be?
Inspiring.
Okay. That, you know what? Here's where I did my person brand check, right? Like, how do I want to be perceived? And who am I? Is that who I am? And is there a gap? So thank you so much.
So moving ahead, and did you ever steal anything from anyone? And I want you to talk about something physical or materialistic.
Yeah. So, when I thought about it, have I stolen things? No, but have I sneaked up and done things? Yes. So things like, when you're this little girl, your parents have gone out and you just feel you want to have Horlicks, you pop a spoon into the jar and you think you've done a great job and your parents, mom won't get to know you. Wet the spoon, put it back. So when she comes back, it's like a messy. That's one. It stayed with me. Then my mom actually said how to pop the Horlicks from the spoon, right? I found that funny actually today when I think back at it. And another thing I think I greatly remember is it's very clear. It's the orange lipstick my mom would have. And I was very fascinated, but she said you're not supposed to use lipsticks and everything. So I remember she had gone out. I dug into her bag, used the lipstick, royally used it, broke it as well, put it back, but never told her that. And then she discovers it on her own. I don't know how the story ended, but I think those are the things that I have sneaked up on.
See, this is the beauty of a rapid fire round. We get to know the other side, other side of you, right? All right. So let's go ahead and find the last bullet. And one of my favorite questions. And I really ask this question just to get to know the imagination and creativity of the guest. Right. So, what is one electronic gadget or the fantasy gadget that you would like to invent yourself or would like to see it live in the world?
I think for me, it would be, I thought through this because I thought if even someone hears it and they kind of can execute, be really wonderful. If we can set our phones on to follow the circadian rhythm, okay? Because I just feel that it's so easy to be glued to the phone. I mean, you will say, today I'm going to get to bed early. And very few have a bedtime routine, right? And I believe it's important to have a bedtime routine. I'm very sacred about these things. But at the same time, I'm also concerned that a lot of people who don't follow it. Then how do you have a product that takes care of that offsets that? So what if your phone has a circadian rhythm? It's like designed in such a way that it follows the circadian rhythm. And like how in the past, when there were no gadgets, so there was no electricity, you would just turn off and you would get to bed. And I'm not saying technology has not been helpful. It's changed and enhanced the quality of life. But if you're not mindful and you allow it to consume you, that's where I would question it. So that is where I felt my gadget would be a phone that is aligned with your circadian rhythm. So people get to bed on time and they're energetic and happy waking up next morning.
I think that has a purpose, and someone listening or watching this show, I think this is a great idea. So probably you can pick it up, and I think we'll be the first consumers to buy it. Wonderful.
And I do not know. I get curious to know what would your invention be in that way.
My invention is simple. Just any device which is cable free. Because right now, if you look at the other side of the desk where I'm sitting, right, it is full of cables and all. I want to create those gadgets which are cable free, because that will reduce a lot of carbon emissions as well. Because the other day I've been to a mobile service center, and I was surprised to see the heap of chargers, okay, that were of old models and all, right, which contributes to a lot of carbon emissions and all if they are not disposed properly and all. So my thing would be that.
Okay, that's wonderful to know. That's wonderful to know. See, I learned something new.
I'm glad. I'm glad to you asked those questions, and also this has been fabulous conversation so far, and I thoroughly enjoyed the rapid fire. With that, let's flip back to the mainstream. And before I let you go, one final question for today's conversation, Kaushi. What is the best professional advice that you have ever received from someone?
So, more than received, I think I observed and I absorbed. What I noticed is if you don't ask, the answer is always no. Because I would watch people. How is that some people are making progress? Forget career normally. Just take, for instance, how is that they get what they want, need, feeling fulfilled? And I think it comes down to being clear about what drives you, what your priorities are. And then I started to understand that if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And I think that is what they were leading by example. And I picked up on that essence because it's so easy to fall into the trap of, I've done my work and people notice it. And that's good. I'm not saying that's not good. But then don't sit with resentment if it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Have you asked for it? So that is because as children, as young children during our times, we grew up in an environment like asking meant like not being grateful for what we already have. And I learned very recently that you can be grateful and still seek and be able to do that with grace. So I think my message to myself was if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And another thing that I think I started to test myself, right? I remember reading Tim Ferriss's book, which is, I think, The 4 Hour Work Week. And he's written, if you have to choose between unhappiness and uncertainty, guess what a lot of us will choose? Unhappiness. Because we don't know how to deal with uncertainty, which is the fear of the unknown. It comes back to our earlier reference about the ego loves to keep us in our familiar zone, even if it's not helpful. The higher self is about the unknown, get comfortable in the unknown. And I think that guidance has really helped me. So, from an advice standpoint, what's something that helped me grow is to understand if I'm unhappy. And if I look at the other facet of unhappiness, is it uncertainty? Can I choose uncertainty and figure out? Yeah, so these two things have really, really helped me grow as an individual.
Such a great note. And I think this is a fabulous conversation. And the way you have concluded it, right? Understand which one you want to choose between unhappiness versus uncertainty. I think you nailed it. And observing and absorbing, I think these are the two words which are going to stick with me for quite a long time. And one other important aspect that you mentioned about is if you don't ask, the answer is always no. Give it a try. That's what I keep telling. Like at times, I feel conscious when I approach certain guests and all, but I give it a try. And many a times, right, the answer is yes. In rare cases, I get a no, but I completely resonate with you.
Yeah, and I think something that which helped me understand is the law of attention and the law of intention.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is not something that I plan to share or whatever, I'm reading this book which is by Deepak Chopra, Abundance: The Inner Path to Wealth. Because the minute we think of wealth, we think of wealth in the mindset of prosperity and money. But that's really not what this is about. How, from a space of fulfillment, you live a life of abundance and how that attracts everything. You're not being restless. It's like, you're not holding onto the steering wheel tight. You let go, you surrender, you operate from a space of faith. So I think those are some of my lessons.
Don't hold the steering wheel tight. Wow, another powerful advice. Awesome. So I thoroughly enjoyed every bit of this conversation, Kaushi, and it's really an honor to host you. Thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for your time and for all the wonderful insights. And on that note, I would like to convey my gratitude again to Deepika for making this happen. So looking forward to another exciting session in future from you, Kaushi. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, because I honestly enjoyed this, because I was in a space where I was reflecting, and reflection is being self-aware, and that's where the change happens. So very grateful for this discussion and this conversation, Naveen.
Pleasure to host you, Kaushi. And friends, that was our episode with Kaushi on building personal brand through well-being as well as authenticity. And before we hop into the trivia section, here's a request to you. In case if you haven't subscribed to us, please subscribe from the app where you have tuned into. And also, if you have loved this conversation and found the episode useful, request you to share it with at least 3 of your friends or colleagues who can benefit from the guiding voice. Thank you so much in advance. And today we had some wonderful nuggets of wisdom from Kaushi, and she has highlighted few of the inspirational leaders across the globe who have been seen as role models from every segment of the life. So today I'm going to bring you another leader who is Tsai Ing-Wen. So Tsai Ing-Wen is an educator and politician. She was Taiwan's first female president. And in fact, she was also the person with Taiwan ethnic minority ancestry Hakka to hold the office. And moreover, she was the only second president who was not a KMT member. And if you were to give a brief background about what KMT is all about, it is the Kuomintang, a Chinese political party that ruled mainland China from 1927 to 1949. And prior to its relocation to Taiwan as a result of the Chinese Civil War, the name of the party translates as China's National People's Party and was historically referred to as the Chinese nationalists. So likewise, if you observe some of the leaders, the path that they have taken is completely unconventional. And just keep in mind, leadership is not an easy path, and it's all about seeing the unseen, right? So that's all from today. And thank you so much for joining me, folks. Please share your topic recommendations and also guest speaker suggestions through social media or email us at theguidingvoiceforyou@gmail.com. Not only that, in case if you have any inspirational leaders across you, please tag them on the social media platform wherever you have found this episode. I'm your host, Naveen Samala, just a fellow IT professional, but a passionate learner on a mission to make the world a better place to live through the conversations that matter and the conversations that will add value to your life and to your career. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, bye-bye. See you all in the next episode with another wonderful guest.